Right, hi guys, it is Dan here, and today we are going to be talking about Marathon, Freedom or Death by Christian Cameron. And this is historical fiction. It's set in the archaic Greek period at the time of the Persian Wars between the Greek states of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Empire, who were like the world power at the time. So yeah, in Killer of Men, which is the first book in this series, this is the Long War series, we met Arimnestos of Plataea, who is like our main protagonist. And we followed his childhood and his coming of age as he kind of becomes basically one of the most feared Greek warriors alive, and also takes part in the Ionian Revolt, which is pretty much the opening stages of the Persian Wars. He then returns to Plataea, which is his home city, and he settles down and becomes a farmer and a bronzesmith, which is what he kind of really wants to do in his heart of hearts, but also it's only really what he wants to do when he's not being like a sort of heroic warrior or a pirate captain or whatever. He's got these kind of two sides of his personality that he's trying to reconcile. But you know, he's still a young guy. He's trying to work his life out. This is normal for someone in their early 20s, which is what he is at that point. So that's the situation that we're in at the start of this book. And then at the start of this one, he gets like a sort of personal plot introduced where he's accused of murder in Athens, and but it's not really that important. It's really just to get him involved in the big political events of the time that are going on in the lead up to the sort of climactic Battle of Marathon, which, if you don't know, is why this book is entitled Marathon. It's about the Battle of Marathon, not a long race. So yeah, Arimnestos manages to take place in some pretty big events, like the Siege of Miletus, like the naval action at Lade. And although they don't go too well for the Greeks overall, Arimnestos manages to do some like pretty cool stuff. And then we're on to Marathon itself, which, you know, is obviously a sort of pretty huge deal historically for Western civilization, and is one of the most famous battles of all time, probably. So, is this book any good? Yes, yeah, it was a fantastic read and a really great window onto ancient Greek culture, I thought. Absolutely loved it. Now, I will be honest and say that this book, it does have a bit of a slow start, because at the beginning there's a load of recap about stuff that happened in the previous book, and then there's that personal plot with Arimnestos that I talked about, which is not super important overall, but it's necessary to move him into the main plot, you know, the build up to the Battle of Marathon. But what I will say, though, is that this was a reread for me, and the first time I read this series, I didn't read Killer of Men first. I actually read this one first, just because I didn't own Killer of Men at the time. This was the first one that I got hold of. And on my first read through, without having all that stuff from Killer of Men that I already knew about, that was actually a really useful part of the book. It didn't drag for me at all at the beginning, because it was establishing those characters, you know, very quickly and effectively. But it does mean that you don't necessarily have to have read Killer of Men in order to enjoy this book. You can jump straight in the second book in the series, and it's absolutely no problem because of that sort of what might be a slow start if you have already read Killer of Men. So, you know, it's a bit of swings and roundabouts there, really. But once you get past all that, you know, maybe just, it's not much, like maybe a quarter of or a third of the way in, then, I mean, this book basically turns into just like a non-stop roller coaster of action with like loads of really exciting set pieces along the way. And, you know, in between these as well, Cameron, he deals with some really big themes about war and violence and justice. You know, especially with the conversations that Arimnestos has with these other two characters, Aristides and Miltiades. And for me, that gives the novel just a little bit more substance than your typical, like, pulpy sort of swords and sandals efforts. And of course, being a Christian Cameron book, you know you're going to get two things at least that are done as well, if not better, than anyone else writing in this genre. You know, firstly, he totally immerses you in the culture of the time, and not just the superficial stuff either. You know, he's got an absolutely amazing way of getting across what is pretty much an entirely alien worldview to our sort of modern sensibilities, but he does it all without judging it to be either good or bad or whatever. And also, you know, without being expository about the whole thing either. The culture's just kind of, it's there in every action and in every bit of dialogue. And then, you know, secondly, and very importantly for a book with this kind of subject matter, is Cameron writes an excellent battle scene, you know, as good as anyone else out there writing at the moment. You know, I was completely caught up in Isty's last stand on the walls of Miletus. I was totally enraged by the treachery of the Samians at Lade. But, you know, of course, Marathon is the title, and Marathon, the Battle of Marathon itself, is the big climactic event of the whole novel, and it's got a 60-page chapter all to itself that really gets across, like, just all the glorious aspects of Greek and Persian notions of heroism. But, you know, also combining all that with just this real, the sense of like loss and waste and tragedy that you get with like any war, obviously. So yeah, I mean, this book, absolutely fantastic. If you want to get into the ancient Greek mindset, and if you want to read about one of the most famous battles in Western history for sure, then, I mean, this is a really great read. And anyone who's interested in ancient Greece, anyone who likes, you know, just really exciting historical fiction in general, check out Christian Cameron. He's absolutely one of the best authors in this genre out there at the minute. So yeah, definitely worth a read for any fans of historical fiction.